Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Capes and Lunatics. It's me, Phil, and I'm back with another special guest, Mr. Troy Brownfield. Among his many accomplishments as executive editor of the Saturday Evening Post, also the author of the new book, Comics For Dummies. So, I guess I can put that up. Troy, it's from what I can tell, and I think the little bit of research I did on the internet, it seems like you're like me. You've been a fan of comics your whole entire life.
Yeah, that's pretty fair to say. I've talked about it before in interviews and lecture kind of stuff, and I was born in '73, so it's really kind of an excellent time to have been born to be into it because you had a lot of different animated series, Super Friends and whatnot. You had Spider-Man, Incredible Hulk, and live action television, Batman and reruns. So you got exposed to a lot of this stuff on a fairly regular basis. It was pretty accessible, and comics at the spinner rack at the grocery store is where I got started. I'm pretty certain that the first issues of Marvel's Star Wars book, the original adaptation, were my first comics.
And see, those are what I call like the gateway stuff, because my first thing, I'm like 5 years younger than you, so like I was into all those cartoons, but also I was there from the beginning for Transformers, and that's what got me into comics, is that original Marvel Comics Transformers. So yeah.
I had I was a Transformers reader, G.I. Joe and stuff. Mm-hmm. I know that very early on I had issues of Defenders, Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man, but I discovered X-Men with 125. That was my first issue of X-Men. So it was very beginning of the Proteus saga. I was 6 years old, and that was it. It was, that's done. A great thing to be hooked by. And
so yeah, like you, I have like decades of reading, and I thought I call myself a comic fan, but like there's stuff in there, like you were teaching me stuff, especially stuff pre-Marvel Comics #1. I was like, wow, forget like this stuff dates back like probably at least 100 years or more. So
yeah, and first of all, thank you. That's great to hear, because one of the things that you really want to do with a book like this is it's got to be accessible to new readers or people who might only know them from movies or animation or whatnot. But it's also, you can't bore the people who kind of live and breathe it. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we kind of got to early on was the history part is important, the character part, and settings, etc. That stuff's all the mass of the book. But that beginning of, there were a lot of years to get to the idea of what Marvel was, and it was part of a big movement. And it's easy to kind of reduce it to, Marvel and DC or whatnot. But there are all these moving parts from Europe and all of these different things that have to happen to make American comics. And I'm really glad that we had the ability to tell a lot of that in the book.
Oh yeah. And okay, my other question was, how did you decide what to put in this book? Because again, there's like this isn't the entire, well, it's a good start, but I'm like, there's so much of the Marvel universe. What did you decide? I'm sure one of the I don't know if it was your decision or someone else's decision, but anything from the MCU had to go in here, probably, just so
Well, this it was definitely a team effort, and I joined the project in June of 24. So the way that it was already in progress. I don't think I'm talking out of school or anything to say, they already had a plan to do a series of books. They already talked to Marvel, and there was a skeleton outline that they kind of put together in-house, that this is kind of a general idea of what might be done. And I took a run at a draft of it, building off theirs, and there was some back and forth, and Marvel weighed in, and it was kind of like, can you also, or less of, or more? And it was a pretty quick back and forth. I'd say within a week or two of real conversation, that was the overall thing was probably determined. And toward the and I think we added a couple more characters just to make sure that there were a couple of things addressed. But if your guess was that we were trying to hit as much of the big stuff as possible and also reflect what people probably know from the general culture, that was definitely a concentration of that.
And if you're looking to like discover the comics through this book, kids, I mean, it's pretty current because I was surprised, like, oh, Blood Hunt's in here. So, I mean, that was only a few months ago.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because stuff is resolving as I'm writing it. And, I thought, and Blood Hunt in particular I knew that I'd be addressing a lot of these big stories and crossovers because there's a chapter of the book that's a big storylines and whatnot. And I thought, okay, if I can work in Blood Hunt and references to other things that are happening right now, then for the moment that it comes out, it's going to seem as absolutely current as possible. And that's some of those character bios I was checking as we're going along to see like how certain storylines were resolving or whatnot, to try to end it as quickly as as close to what was happening as possible. So without giving away certain things, right? Because the Krakoa saga is in the middle of ending, and I'm like, well, do I put this or do I, because it's some of that stuff's still playing out as I was writing it. And, I think that when you look at the book, I think that you'll know that as far as by the end of 2024, it was as close as I could get it.
Yeah, and I congratulate you on that too. I mean, it's coherent because sometimes these days it's hard because sometimes another event's starting before the last one ends.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's when we were looking at the big storylines and kind of breaking them down by decade, that becomes kind of apparent when you're going into the 2000s, because some of these events were pretty spaced out in some respects. In the 80s, when they really started doing the events, Secret Wars was 2 years away from Mutant Massacre. There's a while between that and Fall of the Mutants. There's, about a year between Fall of the Mutants and Inferno. Now it's every family has events, and some of those events tie into each other and whatnot. It's a whole different animal tracking some of those things than in earlier parts.
Yeah, and it seems like pick up in the 90s because I've talked to a few writers from the 90s, and it seems like if you wanted your book to get a push through advertising or the company to really advertise it, you either had to do a big event or with multiple books or something, at least you could splash a big title across the top of the cover.
Yeah, and I think when the advertising is a good point too, because I know it works because it worked on me when I was a kid, because I first started seeing there were ads for like the Claremont, Cockrum, Byrne, X-Men in other books. There were ads for Avengers in other books, and it was stuff that made me look for those things. So that cross promotion can't be understated in terms of building the fan base. It's just really
Oh yeah, or just adding a big character at the time, because in the 90s you couldn't have like a new book without Spider-Man showing up or the Punisher.
That's right.
Like I said, it seems like every new series that came out in the 90s, Spider-Man was going to show up within the first 3 issues somewhere.
Right. That was there were so many of the young heroes getting introduced to the 90s. Darkhawk, Sleepwalker, New Warriors. I think all those guys had Spidey appearances in the first 5 issues. I mean, it was pretty standard.
I mean, again, I think everyone had, because again, even like what was that issue 1 of NFL Super Pro? Wasn't a Spider-Man showing up there?
Right. And my sons are 2018. My oldest is a college sophomore, and my younger one's a high school senior. And I was making jokes about like the NFL Super Pro chapter. Like, do you think they'll let me put US 1 in here? What about Team America? Yeah, this is a joke. So make it to the kids, but it does really put a spotlight on the fact that, wow, there's really a massive character library.
Oh yeah,
that you're working with, and
I mean, if you want,
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say no. If you wanted to do the complete history of Marvel Comics, that would be several volumes of a series. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's like Library of Alexandria kind of stuff. But this is, it's interesting from the standpoint of everybody's got a favorite, and you knew that I liken it in early on in the book that this is like a survey course or a 101 as opposed to the PhD level stuff. This is going to be, your introduction to literature in a way. It's going to be, you're going to talk about Charles Dickens. You're not going to read Nicholas Nickleby. It's you've got to space some of that out and make it in a way. I think that people that might have come in for the movies or cartoons or younger people or what, you make it accessible in a way that they want to read more stuff or find more stuff, or maybe run into a character that they haven't really heard of before. Like, oh, that person's neat. I want to check that out. And, that I think that there's enough space in that, and certainly enough space devoted to some of the big storylines that people have been, oh man, I've never read The Return of the Green Goblin. That sounds cool. I want to find that and check it out,
I mean, it's so funny because I'm sure you ran across this. Like back in the day, people might say, "Oh, you read comics," like like they're all like looking down on you. But these days, I swear, I can't go to work. I can't talk to any friends. Okay, a current example, right before the new Captain America movie came out, there's a Red Hulk now. I'm like, yeah, I've been for a good while here.
Yeah, it's one of those things where when I think our age group kind of experienced it in a weird sort of way, because we definitely had the whole comics, D&D, anime, bad kind of situation, or at least, socially exclusionary kind of situation, where, a lot of people look down on it. But then, 89 Batman was a legit phenomenon, and you went from not being able to find comic related paraphernalia or t-shirts or whatnot to everybody having a Batman shirt. And it was a weird turn.
Yes.
And then of course the 90s comic boom and everything, and all this, X-Men on TV and the animated form and everything. And even though X-Men was selling like 1 million copies a month at that point already, before the Jim Lee #1, that boom is insane, and it does a lot to kind of overturn it, but it's only gotten more pronounced with each wave of, like the 2000 X-Men and on up to the MCU and everything. It's only gotten more accessible for, everybody. And it became mainstream in a really big way. And now I don't think maybe in the 80s, not everybody knew that, Peter Parker was Spider-Man. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody that doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man, or couldn't name a couple of Avengers, which is crazy, honestly, for having grown up in that.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say you mentioned Peter Parker. I guarantee there's a lot of people who didn't know Tony Stark was Iron Man, but now thanks to those movies,
yeah. And I think that that's one thing about Marvel. You see it a tiny bit in DC among the closest team members, or Justice League members might call each other Clark, Bruce, etc. But the tendency in Marvel characters, both in the comics and in film, to use first names, and it really makes you feel as a reader a level of accessibility, and like you actually kind of know them as people a little bit more. And that's one of the things that Marvel's always kind of excelled at, is making heroes seem like regular people with regular problems, but they also have regular interactions. They have people they don't get along with. They have people that they have to work together with, even if they're not wild about, like going into the office. It's just like there's always somebody that's like your office buddy. There's somebody that maybe you have to work a little bit more to be comfortable with. I think Marvel does like a whale of a job of reflecting that in team dynamics, and part of what makes it so good and so accessible.
Oh yeah, it's like what you rate about. Stan was always leading the charge on. It's Marvel. It's the world right outside your window, because again, most of them were back in the day were based in New York. So
yeah, and I learned stuff too when I was going through there. Like Doctor Strange's address on Bleecker Street was an actual Marvel Talents apartment.
yes, that's one of the things I did learn. Yeah, I was like, oh really? Wow.
Yeah, so when I'm going through different things and are like, oh wow, I got to verify that because that's pretty cool. And and things like that, where and I don't know if this is the case, but I've always loved the fact that the X Mansion has a specific address, and I wonder if there's some really annoyed person at 1407 Graymalkin in Westchester who's just like, would you stay out of the yard? I mean, it's just there's the little in jokes that go on to become kind of pop culture lore are interesting, and the tendency that, especially early on, Marvel writers and artists had the habit of kind of putting themselves in books and cameos and whatnot, made it feel like the readers were in on the gag.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, I mean, Marvel and DC would be back and forth. Like, what is that? The infamous, what is it? The Halloween parade?
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I've got the. I don't have the first one. I think I have Marvel feature number 2, like that second Defenders appearance with the Dormammu in the story, and they have Roy and Jean Thomas in the parade, and it's pretty great because by the time that I got that as a back issue, I was old enough to kind of get the joke, of oh, here's actual Marvel folks in here. That's pretty cool.
And I was going to ask you, yeah, and these days it's like we're getting movies that, some of those Marvel movies are making $1 billion, but we're not selling as many comics as we were, like, say, back in the 90s. Is it just distribution? Because, again, you could go many places back in the day. I mean, we had spinner racks and convenience stores or grocery stores, newsstands, and now it's just like down to, comic shops.
Yeah, I think that number one is probably accessibility. Because like you said, and I've always believed this, that when I was coming up, and my first comic shop was the grocery store with the spinner rack, and it was safe enough in the late 70s in Indiana. Like, my mom could park me at the spinner rack, and I could read while she was doing the grocery shopping. I could read most of the stuff on the rack, and I could leave with a couple of books because they were 35 cents or 50 cents or whatever. And I could, and I subscribed to his stuff when I was about 10 years old. I had subscriptions to X-Men and G.I. Joe and a couple, so I was regularly reading these books and reading them at the rack. And then I had read about comic shops, but I didn't. I went to the phone book and found comic shops in my hometown, and I started going to the comic shop like once or twice a month before it became a weekly thing where I could drive myself. But I could. It happened. I happened to have the lucky coincidence of a comic shop being on the same street where I took music lessons, and so I could hit my music lesson, go to the comic shop, maybe get a book, and it opened up a lot of those avenues for me. But if you can't get it at a grocery store or 7-Eleven or a rack at a Walden Book or a Barnes and Noble or whatnot, and your town doesn't have a comic shop, well, then obviously you've got this massive uphill struggle. Like, every town has, 7-Eleven used to stock them, but when the spinner racks went away, I think it hurt. And I know that there are a lot of reasons why it shifted toward those comic shops, but we had about twice as many, maybe 3 times as many comic shops. As I think I heard the other day that there's 1,200 active comic shops in the United States. And at one point in the 90s, there were like 3,400. So that's a big drop. So I think all of those things play into it. Cost is a factor, which isn't always the publisher's fault, because paper costs and everything have gone up over time. Most of the stuff is printed in Canada, which is its own problem now. And it is hard to, and having done some independent stuff myself, the costs are crazy. It's very hard.
That's right here. Yeah.
To get some of those things. And so all of those factors play into it. But I think also, for a lot of people, there are very few in-person communal experiences left. And I think that one of the things that's a big driver of the movies is that they're an in-person communal experience. The past couple of years, I know COVID and things messed it up, but the 2 biggest communal experiences I could think of in the past 5 years are Endgame and the Eras Tour. And It's
Mhm.
past that, it's a lot of phones, a lot of streaming, a lot of differentiated viewing.
Mhm.
I mean, so I don't know what the good answer is, because digital comics are
Yeah.
very helpful, but they aren't.
They're
They
not
are
they're not helping small businesses like your
right.
comic shops.
Yeah, it's a lot of the same problem as the music industry
Mhm.
has. Whereas, um, in the '90s, when there were a bunch of labels, you had multiple sales streams, and a lot of it was genre dependent. Like some genres were really big singles
Mm.
sellers, and then some were really big album sellers. But then you go to digital and streaming, and all of a sudden,
People can just
you
pick
know,
or choose their tracks. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's the business is hurt. Well, it's like, well, we
Mm.
made it more convenient, but we're not quite sure how to make it make more money.
Yeah. And do you think the graphic novel kind of did hurt too? Because I mean, again, the publishers are still putting them out, but again, you can go to like a Barnes and Noble, maybe if you have one, to go get those. Because back in the day, we weren't collecting everything. Now we're collecting every arc that comes out.
Yeah, I think that's probably a little bit harder, because I think that you probably have three types of customers in there, where you have kind of a singles customer, somebody maybe closer to our age group that's used to kind of the weekly ritual.
Mm,
They got a pretty defined pull list. They go once a week, they're getting their stuff, they're adding or dropping new things. And that's pretty much what they do. There's probably a hybrid person who reads the singles and then gets trades of certain things that they might not regularly buy because they want to stay up.
mm,
And then there's probably the trade exclusive people, who it's cool if they're not there every week, they'll just pick up the trades when it comes out. And the market should be able to cater to a lot of different
yeah,
delivery systems, but I don't know how helpful it is to comic shops when they are not the exclusive provider of trades.
yeah.
They're almost the exclusive. You don't go to, say, Barnes and Noble to get singles,
Mm-mm.
but not only does Barnes and Noble have trades, but so does Amazon, so does Target. Target's website, you might not go into a Target and find, King in Black, but you can go to Target's website and order King in Black.
Yeah.
And so it's questions that are beyond me. I mean, I'm sure it helps the publishers in some ways, but I don't know. And the idea of them being accessible in lots of places should be a growth potential, but I don't know if the connections are being made between, so you liked Hawkeye and Disney Plus, go read Matt Fraction's Hawkeye. I don't know what if how we make that missing link.
Well, that's what I'm always saying. But in front of all these movies, in front of the Disney Plus shows, all of it, we should have like a quick little teaser trailer that says, hey, you love this world of Marvel, and get yourself to a comic shop and pick some, pick a story up.
Yeah, kind of the famous deal that Hasbro made with Marvel regarding the GI Joe comic was Hasbro paid for those animated
Yeah.
commercials, and those did bang up numbers. But all the toy tie-ins did really big numbers in the '80s. I was talking to my friend, my friend David Pepos, who wrote. He's writing Cable, Love, and Chrome right
Oh
now.
yeah, I just talked to David about that not too long ago. Yeah.
Oh yeah, David and I are great friends. We've been
Okay.
friends for a
Yeah.
long time. But I was just talking to him about the fact that if you look at statements of ownership from the '80s, there were months where ROM sold or at least shipped, like 300,000 copies between subscriptions and comic stuff, which is crazy.
Mhm.
And Micronauts is like 200K and some, and those books ran a long time. Like ROM ran
Like
like
70 some was it?
yeah, 70 some issues. Yeah. And Micronauts had a couple of series and so forth, but that toy anchor really helped. And of course, G.I. Joe and Transformers are kind of the avatars of it. Star Wars too. Star Wars ran like 102 issues, the original series. A lot of that was buoyed by, or 112, like the 77 Star Wars that ran up into, they were doing the stuff with the Hoojibs and everything at the end. But those all had toy lines that floated them. And if you went to, and the grocery stores carried the toys at the same time too. You could literally go to like Kroger and get your Star Wars comic and your Star Wars figure. And so again, there's that idea of like the world's changed a lot, but there was certainly a time period when the stuff with toys and cartoons were really big drivers of what the comics were that were selling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, the 80s, they weren't competing with the internet or.
Right. I mean, it wasn't unusual, and please don't think this is sad, anyone, but it wasn't unusual, especially as we got older, go to the comic shop with friends, everybody got their own stuff, and then you'd like sit around and listen to like whatever new album come out, and you and your buddies are trading your books back and forth that you just got, and everybody's reading kind of everything.
Oh yeah.
At that point, and it made for community. Community is really important. Like we have a chapter on building community in the book, and that was important to me. It was something we talked about, but I didn't realize how important it was until kind of I was finished with it. Mm-hmm. It's like, oh, I'm really glad this is here.
And just the phenomenon of like, being surprised by a story. I swear these days, New Comic Book Day is Wednesday. I'm seeing spoilers on Monday morning. I'm like, well, thanks. I'm trying not to click on anything, but I'm like, thanks a lot.
Yeah. I wrote for Newsarama for 7 years, and I was there during this period when big companies were giving press releases to the New York Times before we had our hands on copies of the book to even do a story about it. Oh, and so they were getting spoiled in big newspapers, and before fans or even us had gotten, because we frequently got preview copies and whatnot so that we could write stories or reviews concurrent with release date. But yeah, it's like we're getting scooped by the New York Times. It's kind of like, well, what do I do here? But at the same time, you're running a real risk. If you're going to spoil that story, you're either going to make a whole lot of people run out and get it because they have to see it for themselves, or you're going to make a whole lot of people say, now I don't care. And that's a real roll of the dice with any of those. Just like showing too much in a trailer.
Yeah. I kind of say, I think the last secret the internet didn't spoil for comics. It has to be 1997's Thunderbolts #1. I think that's the last time.
Yeah, and that is one of, if not my favorite, surprise endings in comics, period. And partially because just the way that Bagley's great, music's great and everything, but that turned the page into, the very large balloon of Baron Zemo and the Masters of Evil. You can almost hear him say it. Mm-hmm. It's just lands so perfectly. And, it's one of those times where I'm like, when does 2 come out?
Yes.
Because, it's like, I'm in, now what? And it was a great landing. And it was one of those things I addressed the Thunderbolts in the book, and I was, really skated around. I guess I'm going to have to give it away, because there's not a way to not.
It's almost 30 years old. So. Right.
But I do like the fact that so the Thunderbolts Epic collections have been coming out pretty recently. So I love the idea that there's some kid who maybe their first Marvel movie was Infinity War or something, and that kid's going to pick up Thunderbolts #1 and have their mind blown by that reveal. No one's ever spoiled it for him.
Oh yeah, because it's not the same as the MCU Thunderbolts. So yeah, you can be in for a complete surprise. And then that's the thing, at least for me as a kid, that stuff draws you in, because then you're like, Zemo from the movies. You're like, wait a minute, why is Baron Zemo's face all messed up? So then you got to do a deep dive into what happened to Baron Zemo. And
yeah, I had I still have it, but do you remember Power Records, like the book and records?
Yes. Yeah.
I have the Captain America one where he and Falcon fight the Phoenix, which is actually Helmut Zemo, and it's the issue where he gets his face messed up. But they had the book and record of that, and so I had this kind of early-ish exposure to the idea of Baron Zemo in as a character. 5-ish, 6-ish, however old I was when I had that, like when I got it for the first time. And those were pretty interesting as far as introductory stories, because they've got like a Spider-Man and Man-Wolf one, and
that's the one I had. And I forget, I was way too young. It freaked me out because you could hear the rain, you could hear the werewolf. I was just like, I was like 4 or 5. I was like, oh, Jesus.
There's a Man Thing one as well, that is absolutely terrifying. I don't want to get into the whole thing, but there's a really scary clown and self-harm stuff in the story and everything, and it's like, who approved this to be a book and record for children?
Oh yeah, they didn't change the stories at all. It's just like, what do we do?
Yeah, there's a Batman one with a super creepy Jim Aparo Joker, like great art, but man, when you were that little, it was kind of like, I don't want to look at this page for too
long. All right, here's my question, since you are such an expert. Okay. Who is one character who hasn't appeared in the MCU yet that you think they should be the next character introduced in the MCU?
Oh man, well there's one that they've talked a little bit about, that they haven't done anything with, that they've laid the tracks for, but I'd really like to see Nova.
Oh, nice.
Because there's a lot of stuff they've got a decently established space MCU with the Guardians, and they introduced the idea of the Nova card. They introduced the idea that Thanos kind of laid waste to Xandar. That is right there to do. I mean, like, all that setup is, who would have thought that millions of people would know what Xandar is? But now you can kind of walk up to, hey, Thanos wiped out Xandar. The world mind needs a Nova, blah, blah, blah. It's pretty easy setup, and there's a lot of space Marvel that's yet to be explored, and Ios and whatnot. Nova would be a great one. I do look forward to the inevitable reconnection of the X-Men to the MCU, because, I think it'll be great to finally, just like it was an Endgame, to see everybody together. Mm-hmm. It would be great to see the X-Men and FF finally get into the connections with everybody. One thing, the scene I've always wanted to see is that would be fit well somewhere in a Spider-Man movie, is just Spidey swinging through New York as he does, dropping in on other people's stuff as he goes along. Yes. Like Daredevil's fighting a bunch of ninjas, he drops in, he knocks a couple of ninjas out, says goodbye, like, sees Luke Cage, just like it would be in the comics. I've always wanted to see that just kind of montage scene of Spidey going through a New York Spidey day and all the people he runs into.
Basically, he's just swinging through everyone's, Phase 6 or Phase 7 movie and show. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I've always wanted to see something like that, because the way that Spidey's books are set up, it was 3-4 ongoing series. He's always bouncing back and forth between everybody else's adventures too. So that would be a fun thing to see.
Oh yeah. But when you said Nova, you came close to mine. I want to see Quasar in the MCU.
Oh. Yeah, man. I'm a big Quasar fan. I really liked Quasar, particularly in the we have that 80s Avengers run where with Roger Stern and everything. It's right, with Roger Stern writing. It's that team is actually pretty close to being around in the MCU right now, because you do have Monica Rambeau, you've got She-Hulk, you had a Hercules teased at the end of Love and Thunder, Black Knight was teased, Namor. You're one Quasar away from that team at this point.
Yeah, I just love Mark Grunwald, his writing.
Oh yeah. There was that kind of through line of Cap mentoring Wendell, and him being prepared to take the big hit in Infinity War, taking the ultimate nullifier that he was ready to fight, just be that guy. And then in Thanos Imperative, he had a pretty big role in that, when they had the fight against the Cancerverse. Quasar was a prominent part. Very cool stuff.
Oh yeah. And like you were mentioning the X-Men stuff, I think the group that gets the biggest pop, for like a team that's never hit the MCU proper and stuff, Alpha Flight. I see so many people saying, "Oh yeah, Alpha Flight's great. We need Alpha Flight."
Oh yeah, and I know it's easy for me to say, "Oh, I love Alpha Flight." Like, make no mistake, I'm a big figure collector as well, and the Alpha Flight box set of Marvel Legends was a big highlight for me when it came out. Because one of the things I was complain about, like, where the hell is Alpha Flight? And then they gave you like 5 members of Alpha Flight in one box, so I was pretty delighted by that. But there's a lot that could be done with Alpha Flight in the context of not just the MCU, but giving us another location in Canada, and giving us a lot of the stuff that Byrne did that made the series explicitly Canadian, like the mythology and acknowledging different tribal stuff, but also French stuff, all the things that kind of are unique about the country. And certainly the fight with Omega Flight is a highlight. That for that issue 12, that whole storyline is outstanding.
And if you're looking for a way to introduce them, I mean, again, you can always tie them into Wolverine as they did.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of track to get from one to the other pretty quickly. I think that you probably want to avoid the tendency to make it too jokey, though, because I think that there's so much emphasis put on the Canadian sense of humor that you don't want to have that make it a feature and not a bug. I guess.
I always think it's humorous. The short guy in the team is called Puck. I was like, oh, hockey puck, okay.
Yeah, I do love the naming of characters from that era, because there's a lot of kind of leaning into stereotype a little bit.
Yeah,
but I think with Claremont and Byrne, they were really trying to emphasize Canadian personality.
Yes,
with Shaman, Snowbird, North Star, Aurora. I mean, this is all very Sasquatch. This is all like super Canadian. It's like Canadian version of saying Captain America in a way, because it's like, what do you think about? Well, we think of Northern Lights, we think of this history, etc. And they really did kind of hit it with a lot of those character names.
I'm trying to think. One of the big events you write about in the book. Again, it's very controversial. Some people like it, some people don't. But again, a lot of the controversial stuff from the 90s, people are, looking back fondly 30 years later. But I always love the Spider-Man clone saga.
Yeah, that's here's a funny note about at a certain point, some of the stories I was writing about, because I was trying to put the issue numbers at the top, and some of them had so many tie-ins that I would do the main issues and then be like plus 76 assorted issues of, and the Clone Saga is one of those. It's massive. And I know at the time that kind of the deal was it got so popular that they just leaned into it and kept it going, that it was only supposed to be a finite amount. And then it went for literal years.
Oh yeah, I think I heard it was only supposed to go like 6 months or something, but then it was selling so well, like the people, the money people were just like, no, keep it going, and meanwhile it lasted like 2 years.
Yeah, and it's funny, like you said, like there are parts of that were really vilified, and I think the main thing that people got mad about was the notion that, oh, Peter wasn't Peter, but the end game was always going to be Peter's always been Peter, and they kind of get to that point eventually. But I tell you, lately, when they've done, and just Marvel Legends reference again, because they recently did, a Kane figure and whatnot for the first time, the reactions to those are huge. Like, I've always wanted a Kane, because they've never been, even in like the Toy Biz lines and stuff, there's never a Kane. There's a Kane is Scarlet Spider.
Yeah.
But not Kane in the villainous outfit with the long hair and the cape. And, they've done most of the villains from Maximum Carnage. But the reaction to those is always really big. Because the adult collectors, man, they did grow. A lot of them grew up in our phase or shortly thereafter, and that's the stuff that they really connect with. They weren't the jaded collectors in the 90s to be told by other people that it was bad. They loved it, and that's great, because everybody should get the thing that they love. They should have something that belongs to them. I'm always deeply amused by the conversations of like, does this belong to Gen X? Does this belong to the millennials? Does it belong? It's like, well, it belongs to whoever wants it. Some people are going to gravitate to their own thing, and that's all fine.
But yeah, and again, being around as long as we have been, it's so funny that all the stuff that was vilified in the 90s, now people are looking back fondly on like the Clone Saga or like Daredevil's black armor costume. One of my co-hosts and I talk to DG Chichester every month, and that's making a big comeback.
Yeah, and some of the stuff that has really endured was definitely of that era. I mean, you can't make X-Men 97 without people having a deep and abiding love for that animated series and that iteration of the characters from that time. Or Deadpool is, Joe Kelly added the fourth wall breaking later, but Deadpool was always a smartass. He's X-Force, New Mutants 98, he shows up and is kind of fully formed in a way, but then only gets more layers as it goes along. But he's kind of intrinsic to that 90s boom period.
Oh yeah.
And now to see where that, I mean, I didn't expect it, but there are times along the way when I've been like, I definitely didn't see this happening. I didn't see all of this stuff exploding in the way that it did. I thought that, Batman, I thought, was a once in a lifetime kind of thing, because that faded kind of quickly. There's a cooling off on the Batman stuff after a couple of years. But
yeah, well, I think that Batman and Robin movie kind of cooled stuff down for a while.
Yeah, right.
But no, it's so fun. The funniest thing I think I ever saw on the internet, I guess it was a younger reader who was, it was around the time the Titans TV show was out and they were introducing Deathstroke, and somebody online goes, "Who is this Deathstroke? They just ripped off Deadpool."
Yeah, I've always kind of loved the, this is my first time here kind of comment.
Yes.
That kind of thing. It's funny.
Or like the She-Hulk TV show, people were like, "Oh, why they have to go and create a She-Hulk?"
Yeah. There's, and that one's particularly funny because that, obviously that character's been around for decades.
Oh yeah.
And I get that she didn't make the jump. I mean, you've seen She-Hulk in animation and stuff, but that didn't have maybe the cultural footprint kind of jump that others did. But come on, wait a minute before you say something online. Google is your friend.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm always think about all this stuff. I'm like, why did a quick Google search would,
Yeah. The one that really cracked me up was a number of years ago when Kanye and Paul McCartney appeared on the Grammys, and there were a ton of people on Twitter saying, "Who's Paul McCartney?" And I was pretty quick to say, don't make fun of them, because we didn't know who Paul McCartney was at some point either. Make fun of them for not Googling it.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, make fun of them for going to Twitter to ask. Like, go to Google first. And if you're like, Paul McCartney is a bass player, co-writer for the Beatles, blah blah blah, you go, "Oh, I've heard of the Beatles. Never mind. I'm not gonna, I'll just be over here." You could have saved yourself.
Exactly. All right, Troy, I think I'm going to let you go. Thank you so much. Again, everyone, go get Marvel Comics for Dummies. Again, like I said, I've been reading comics for over 30 years, and I learned some stuff from this thing. So, yeah, it's worth your time for a pickup. And again, if you just watch the MCU movies, this is a great fountain of information for you. And are you working on anything else, Troy? Anything you want to promote?
Oh, man, that's a loaded question. I am, but not stuff I can talk about yet.
See, that's a sign of a good writer, because it seems like the people I talk to who say, "Oh, I have something, but I can't," are usually very successful at this.
Well, based on our conversation, I think you'll dig it, but I'll leave it at that. But with respect to my regular stuff, like you said at the top, I'm the executive editor at the Saturday Evening Post, and so I write stuff there pretty frequently. I'm working on a story right now about greatest songs with twist endings, or twists to them, so like narrative twists, etc. Because I like to get into the weird stuff like that. I write a lot about music there, but also the occasional comic or film piece. But the Post as a whole has a lot of fun history articles and culture articles and whatnot. So just nice. SaturdayEveningPost.com. And if people are interested in my social stuff, I'm on pretty much everything just as Troy Brownfield. So Blue Sky Threads, Facebook, etc. I'm pretty easy to find, I think. So
yeah, I think I've found a lot of your accounts. Yeah,
and definitely thanks for thinking of the book, and I'm glad you enjoyed it. And thanks for giving us a platform to talk about it.
Oh, no, you're welcome. Again, if you have anything else you ever want to promote, just yeah, let me know, and yeah, we'll have you back on and whatever you want to do. So
Sure thing. Thanks a lot.
all right, thank you, sir. All right, everyone. Troy Brownfield, go pick up the book, Marvel Comics for Dummies.
All right. Have a good